Have you ever felt the sting of silence from someone who claims to want you? It's that frustrating moment when you know he craves you. Not just physically, not just casually, but in a way that feels real and deep. And yet, he suddenly pulls away. He grows quiet, distant, elusive. And what's most bewildering, there's no explanation, no clear reason, just silence. It's confusing, even painful. But what if I told you that this kind of silence doesn't always mean what you think it does? That what appears like emotional neglect or disinterest could actually stem from something far more complex, something deeply rooted in male psychology? Stay with me, because understanding this truth could shift your entire perspective on relationships and attraction. Men and women, emotionally wired differently. To truly understand male silence, we have to start with the basic yet essential premise. Men and women are not emotionally the same. This is not about superiority or inferiority. It's not about stereotypes. It's about understanding the fundamental psychological wiring shaped by biology, culture, and upbringing. Women, might on average, are conditioned and encouraged to express their emotions. From childhood, many girls are taught to communicate what they feel, to seek connection, to lean into vulnerability. This isn't a flaw, it's a profound strength. Emotional fluency gives women the tools to process, express, and often heal in ways that men are never taught. Men, on the other hand, are taught a different lesson. Emotions are dangerous. They're messy. They get in the way of logic, control, strength, and dominance. The very traits men are often rewarded for. From a young age, boys learn that to be seen as strong, they must remain stoic, detached, in control. This training doesn't disappear in adulthood. If anything, it hardens. So what happens when a man, particularly one who has spent years perfecting emotional control, finds himself craving a woman on a deep, almost primal level? He doesn't always move closer. In fact, many times he pulls away. Not because he doesn't care, not because he's playing games, but because he's overwhelmed. The misinterpretation trap. Here's where many women fall into a painful trap. When a man withdraws, silence is often misread as rejection. You might start to think, he doesn't care. He's losing interest. I did something wrong. If he wanted me, he'd fight for me. These thoughts are understandable, but not always accurate. And believing them can lead to reactive behaviors, chasing, over-explaining, seeking reassurance, demanding clarity. But from the male perspective, that pressure only adds to the emotional turmoil he's already navigating. What's truly happening underneath his silence? The fear beneath the craving. When a man craves a woman, when he deeply wants her, not just physically, but emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, he enters a psychological space he's often not equipped to handle. Because intense desire, real, meaningful desire, threatens the emotional structure he's built to survive in the world. Suddenly, he's no longer just a self-contained entity. He's affected. He feels vulnerable. And that is terrifying. For many men, vulnerability is not a doorway to intimacy. It's a risk, a threat, something to be managed, minimized, or avoided. Imagine spending your entire life learning to suppress emotions, to maintain composure, to avoid emotional exposure. And then meeting someone who shakes that foundation, who ignites longing, who makes you feel seen in a way that makes you feel naked. For men who aren't used to it, this doesn't always feel romantic. It feels destabilizing. That destabilization often leads to one of the most misunderstood male behaviors, withdrawal. Why he pulls back. Men withdraw for many reasons, but when it happens in the early stages of real emotional connection, it's often for one primary purpose: to process, to regain emotional equilibrium, to return to a place of perceived safety and control. This doesn't mean he doesn't feel anything for you. In fact, it might mean he feels so much that he doesn't know how to contain it, and without the emotional tools to express what's happening inside him, silence becomes his coping mechanism. Think of it like a system reboot. The deeper the craving, the more threatened his emotional software becomes. His internal programming says, "This is too much. Pull back, protect yourself, get clear." But most men don't say this out loud, not because they're being deceptive, but because they often don't consciously know they're doing it. It's instinctual, a conditioned response born from years of learned emotional self-protection. And when the woman, understandably, begins to react, question, or chase, he feels more pressure, more confusion, more distance between what he feels and what he can articulate. So he retreats further. The silent spiral. This dynamic often leads to a heartbreaking spiral. 1. He pulls away to process what he's feeling. 2. She feels hurt or rejected and starts seeking reassurance. 3. He feels pressured, unable to provide clarity, so he pulls back more. 4. She panics, thinking she's losing him, and tries harder. 5. He shuts down completely, and the connection begins to deteriorate. This isn't about blame. It's about misunderstanding. And it happens more often than you think. But it doesn't have to end that way. Because once you understand the deeper truth behind a man's silence, and learn how to respond from a place of self-assurance rather than insecurity, everything can shift. Not just in this relationship, but in how you experience romantic connection for the rest of your life. A new perspective on silence. Let's pause here for a moment. What if you could interpret a man's silence not as a threat, but as a signal? A sign that something meaningful is being stirred inside him? What if you could see withdrawal not as abandonment, but as a moment of internal reorientation? This perspective doesn't mean tolerating neglect or excusing bad behavior. It means learning how to read the emotional map of a man who hasn't been taught to speak the same emotional language as you. And this shift in perspective begins with you. Not with changing him, not with fixing the situation, but with grounding yourself in self-respect, emotional intelligence, and confidence. Because here's the truth. If you can stay calm when he goes silent, if you can hold your ground instead of chasing, if you can remain radiant, unshaken, and centered in your worth, he will notice, he will feel it, and he will return, not out of guilt or pressure, but out of genuine desire. Because the most irresistible woman to a man who craves deeply is the one who doesn't collapse under the weight of his silence. Let's go deeper. We've talked about how silence from a man, particularly one who deeply desires you, can be a coping mechanism rather than a rejection. But to truly understand this silence, you have to understand the war within him, the emotional conflict that rises when deep craving collides with the primal fear of vulnerability. Because when a man feels something powerful for a woman, his reaction isn't always to move closer. Sometimes, the intensity of his desire causes him to pull away, not because he doesn't want her, but because he wants her too much. Desire isn't simple for men. You might assume that desire naturally leads to pursuit, that when a man feels strong attraction, he'll act on it without hesitation, that he'll call more, text more, show up more, move toward you in a straight line. But here's the paradox. The stronger the desire, the more unsettling it can be. For a man who has spent his life mastering emotional control and building a persona based on competence, independence, and self-reliance, deep desire feels like emotional chaos. And chaos to him feels dangerous. So what does he do? He hits the brakes. He slows down or even retreats, not because he wants less, but because he's trying to make sense of feelings that threaten the emotional structure he's built his life around. This is where his inner conflict begins to emerge. The battle between longing and self-protection. Every man carries a unique emotional blueprint shaped by his upbringing, experiences, and beliefs. But for many men, the following message is drilled in from an early age. To be a man, you must be strong, controlled, independent, logical, unshakable. This message becomes part of their identity. So when a woman comes into their life who stirs something profound, who touches not just their body, but their heart and soul, it creates an inner conflict. Longing says, go to her. Let yourself feel this. Lean in. Fear says, this will undo you. She could hurt you. You're not in control. And in that moment, a man is torn. He's not trying to play games. He's not testing you. He's trying to figure out how to feel something deeply without losing himself in the process. This is why the silence is so confusing. Because from the outside, he looks calm, detached even. But inside, he's spinning. He's trying to reconcile the part of him that wants you with the part of him that feels utterly exposed by how much he wants you. This internal war is silent, but it's fierce. Masculinity and emotional risk. There's something else happening here. Something many women don't see. When a man meets a woman he genuinely desires, it doesn't just trigger longing. It triggers responsibility. In his mind, love isn't just about feelings. It's about performance. He begins asking himself questions he may not voice, but which consume him internally. Am I ready for this? Can I provide for her? Emotionally, mentally, financially? Am I strong enough to carry the weight of what she needs? Will she see me as a man she can respect, or expose my insecurities? And if he feels uncertain in any of those areas, if he doubts his readiness, his stability, his ability to meet your needs, he won't always admit it. Instead, he might retreat. Because for many men, admitting vulnerability feels like admitting failure. And the last thing a man wants, especially with a woman he admires, is to be seen as not enough. So rather than risk disappointment or perceived inadequacy, he creates distance. Not because he doesn't care, but because he cares so much, he's terrified of getting it wrong. This is where his silence becomes more than avoidance. It becomes self-protection. The woman's response, what changes everything. Now let's look at what happens on your side. You feel the pull, the connection, the chemistry, the emotional depth. You know something meaningful is there, but suddenly he goes quiet, withdrawn, not the same. And naturally you begin to question, did I do something wrong? Why is he acting distant? Was I imagining the connection? This is the critical juncture, the moment, where your reaction can either draw him closer or push him further away. Because what you do next communicates something powerful. If you respond with panic, constant messages, emotional outbursts, asking where things stand, he will interpret it not as love, but as pressure. And pressure kills desire. Not because your feelings are wrong, but because your response confirms his biggest fear, that closeness equals control, not freedom. Why freedom is everything to a man. Here's something most women don't realize. For a man, freedom is oxygen. Not freedom in the sense of casual sex or avoiding commitment, but emotional freedom. The feeling that he can be with you by choice, not by demand. When a man feels like he is free to come to you, not obligated to explain himself at every turn, he is far more likely to return with clarity and commitment. But if he feels like your happiness depends on his presence, if he feels like he's responsible for your emotional security, if he feels like space is interpreted as betrayal, he will feel trapped, even if he loves you. This is where most women, without realizing it, sabotage the very thing they want. Because in their desire to reconnect, they unintentionally signal emotional dependence. And while men want to be needed in certain ways, they don't want to feel like your sense of self falls apart without them. They want to feel chosen, not chased. Desired, not demanded. Admired, not emotionally pursued out of fear. The power of stillness. So what should you do when he goes quiet? You stay still. You stay grounded. You breathe. You allow his process to unfold, without making it about your worth. This doesn't mean ignoring red flags or tolerating disrespect, but it means recognizing the difference between silence rooted in disinterest and silence born from emotional overload. When you understand the difference, and when you choose to respond from strength rather than scarcity, something powerful happens. He begins to feel safe, not because you said the perfect thing, not because you chased him down, but because your stillness tells him, I want you, but I don't need you to define me. And that kind of energy, that's irresistible. At this point, you understand that when a man goes silent, it's often not a rejection, but a reflection of his internal emotional storm. You also now know that craving you deeply doesn't necessarily make him chase harder. In fact, it may cause him to retreat, to pause, to withdraw in order to process. But to go even deeper, we need to explore the psychology of masculine identity. Because in order to love freely, to express desire clearly, and to show up consistently. A man needs to feel something he rarely talks about, a sense of purpose, not just in life, in love. How masculine identity is built. From an early age, many boys are subtly or overtly taught that their value is tied to what they can do, not who they are. They're taught that they must provide, protect, succeed, win, fix, lead, whether it's through expectations at home, school, sports, or later in careers and relationships. The masculine blueprint becomes centered around performance. Am I enough? Becomes, am I doing enough? This is crucial to understand, because when a man steps into a romantic connection, he doesn't just want to be desired. He wants to be worthy of that desire. The weight of wanting to be enough. When a man desires a woman, especially on a soul-deep level, it stirs more than attraction. It stirs responsibility. He doesn't just ask, "Do I want her?" He asks, "Am I the kind of man who deserves her? Can I make her feel safe? Can I give her the future she deserves? Will she respect me, or will she see my flaws?" And if he doesn't know the answer to those questions, if there's any hesitation in his self-worth, his finances, his emotional stability, or his direction in life, he often won't move forward. Not because he doesn't care, but because he cares too much to fail her. This is where male silence is often misunderstood. You might think, if he loves me, why isn't he showing up? But he may be thinking, if I show up now, and I'm not ready, I might lose her anyway. And to him, that risk is unbearable. Men are defined by purpose. Purpose is central to the masculine psyche. A man without a mission feels lost, directionless, and often inadequate. When a man is in his purpose, when he knows what he stands for, what he's building and where he's going, he can show up in love with clarity. But when he's not in his purpose, when he feels adrift, unsure of his place in the world, or disconnected from meaningful achievement, love doesn't feel like a gift. It feels like pressure, a responsibility he's not sure he can handle. That's why so many men, even when they feel deep emotions for a woman, pull away when life feels uncertain. It's not that he doesn't feel for you. It's that he doesn't feel solid in himself. And rather than be exposed, rather than risk disappointing you, he retreats. He goes quiet. He disappears. Not to hurt you, but to protect you from a version of himself he doesn't fully respect. Why he won't always tell you. Here's the kicker. He probably won't say any of this. Not, "I'm not where I want to be." Not, "I feel like a failure." Not, "I love you, but I'm scared I'll let you down." Instead, he'll say things like, "I'm just busy right now. I need some time. I'm not ready for a relationship. It's not you, it's me." And as cliché as those words sound, sometimes they're the truth. But they're not the full truth, because the full truth would require him to expose something he's been taught to hide his whole life. Fear. Fear of failure. Fear of being seen as weak. Fear of not living up to your expectations. Fear that, if he lets himself fully fall, he'll be crushed if it doesn't work out. And men, for all their strength, struggle deeply with that kind of vulnerability. The illusion of control. Control gives men a sense of safety. And desire, deep, soul-shaking desire, threatens that control. It introduces uncertainty. It makes them feel seen in a way they may not be comfortable with. When a man desires a woman he deeply admires, especially one who seems emotionally intelligent, self-possessed, or spiritually attuned, he's not just pulled toward her, he's exposed. And that exposure is terrifying, because now someone else has the power to see past his armor, witness his flaws, trigger his shame, reflect back his inadequacies. For some men, especially those still battling with self-worth, the connection feels dangerous. Not because she's doing anything wrong, but because she's a mirror. And that mirror shows him everything he hasn't healed yet. So what does he do? He steps back. He tries to regain control. Not of the relationship, but of himself. Because unless a man feels like he is in charge of his world, his emotions, and his mission, he doesn't feel ready to open fully to love. Not the kind of love that requires depth. Not the kind of love that sees him. Why chasing doesn't work, but trusting yourself does. When a woman senses this withdrawal, she often does the most human thing imaginable. She reaches out. She wants answers, clarity, reconnection. But in the mind of a man already overwhelmed, this often reads as emotional pressure. Not because her feelings are wrong, but because he doesn't have the internal space to carry her anxiety and his own confusion. So he retreats further. That's why your response to his silence matters more than you think. Because if you make it about you, you fall into the trap. But if you remain centered, trusting yourself, grounded in your own value, you become the very thing his fear is testing for. Stability, strength, emotional maturity. You become the safe place he doesn't have to manage. And in that space, his admiration deepens. His resistance softens. His desire becomes safe to express. Because he knows you don't need him to be perfect. You just need him to be real. And that's something a man will fight for. Not out of guilt or pressure, but out of genuine reverence. By now, we've explored the inner workings of the masculine mind, how men often pull away. Not due to a lack of feeling, but because of overwhelming desire, fear of inadequacy, and a need to regain emotional control. Now let's talk about you. Specifically, let's talk about what happens when you stop chasing his silence and instead lean into the most magnetic, transformative force available to you. Feminine energy. Not feminine in the stereotypical or superficial sense, but the embodied feminine, the energy of grounded presence, emotional sovereignty, and radiant self-respect. The kind of energy that doesn't just attract a man back, it compels him, because it speaks to the deepest part of him. Not the part that needs to conquer, but the part that yearns to connect. The gift of emotional sovereignty. When a man pulls away and goes silent, it often triggers the oldest wound in many women. Am I not enough? And from that question arises the impulse to do something, anything, to fix it, to reach out, to explain yourself, to make sure he knows you care, to try to pull him back. But here's the hard truth. Chasing creates pressure, and pressure, especially emotional pressure, kills attraction. Men don't fall in love because a woman convinces them to. They fall in love when they feel safe to admire her, desire her, and respect her on their own terms. This is why your stillness, your ability to hold space for his silence without collapsing, is so powerful. It shows him something rare, that your emotional well-being does not depend on his approval, that you're whole, with or without him, that you want him, but you do not need him to define your value, and that is irresistible. Why confidence is more powerful than beauty. We live in a world obsessed with surface attraction. How someone looks, dresses, presents themselves. But long-term emotional attraction goes far beyond the physical. It's not about how perfect you are. It's about how secure you are. Do you trust yourself, even when someone else pulls away? Do you stay centered, even when things feel uncertain? Do you radiate calm when he's in chaos? Because when a woman holds herself with that kind of quiet confidence, a man feels it, even in his distance, even in his withdrawal. It creates a contrast between the turbulence he's feeling inside and the grounded, graceful presence you embody. And that contrast becomes a magnet, not because you tried to be alluring, but because you were authentic and unshaken. What feminine energy is and what it's not. Let's get one thing clear. Feminine energy isn't passive. It's receptive. It doesn't mean doing nothing. It means doing the right things from the right energy. Feminine energy doesn't chase, but it invites. It doesn't demand, but it radiates. It doesn't force closeness, but it creates the space where connection can return organically. And most importantly, it holds boundaries. Because boundaries are not about pushing people away. They're about showing the world, and yourself, what you will and will not accept. So when a man goes silent, your feminine power lies in how you respond. Do you flood him with anxious texts? Do you replay every interaction looking for what you did wrong? Do you ask for answers that he's not emotionally ready to give? Or do you step back and breathe? Do you return to your own joy, your own rituals, your own passions? Do you trust that his silence is not a reflection of your worth, but a reflection of his internal state? When you choose the second path, something powerful happens. You step into your feminine sovereignty, and that sovereignty is not only attractive, it's transformational. You become the safe space he craves. Remember, men fear vulnerability because they fear losing control. So when they feel desire, when they feel connection, when they feel real intimacy, it brings up the parts of themselves they often avoid. Shame, doubt, past wounds, insecurity. But if you respond with grounded presence, if you don't react from panic or scarcity, you become something rare in his world. A woman who sees him, but doesn't try to fix him. A woman who feels deeply, but doesn't fall apart. A woman who wants connection, but doesn't beg for it. That kind of energy doesn't push a man away. It pulls him closer. Not because you manipulated him into returning, but because you created a space where he can return without shame. And that matters more than anything. Don't prove yourself. Embody yourself. When a man withdraws, many women go into prove mode. I'll show him I'm good enough. If I explain myself better, maybe he'll understand. If I keep reminding him how much I care, he won't leave. But this energy isn't attractive. It's unbalanced. Because at its core, it's saying, you define my value. And the moment someone else defines your value, you've handed over your power. Instead of proving yourself, try this. Embody yourself. Embody your strength. Embody your radiance. Embody your truth. Embody your standards. Because when you live from embodied self-worth, your energy shifts from pick me to I choose me. And ironically, that's when he's most likely to choose you too. Not because you asked for it, but because your self-respect created a gravitational pull he couldn't ignore. The energy that makes you irreplaceable. Here's what it comes down to. Men don't want to feel needed in a way that suffocates them. They want to feel wanted by someone who is whole. Someone who enhances their life, not someone who depends on them for emotional survival. So when you stay centered in your power, when you remain emotionally steady, even in uncertainty, when you allow him the space to feel his own emotions without making it your job to fix them, you become irreplaceable. Not because you're flawless, not because you did everything right, but because your presence is no longer about getting anything from him. It's about being so anchored in your own value that you invite rather than insist. Desire grows in that space. Respect deepens in that space. Love returns in that space. And if he's the right man, he'll come back. Not because you demanded it, but because your energy was the only one that didn't ask him to be anything other than himself, while never betraying who you are in the process. If you've made it this far, you already understand something that many people never do. That relationships are not about controlling someone else's behavior. They're about mastering your own energy. You've seen how men retreat not because they don't care, but because they're overwhelmed with feelings, expectations, and often themselves. You've seen how embodying your feminine energy, emotional sovereignty, and self-respect can pull a man back without a single word. But now comes the most important question of all. What if he doesn't come back? What if the silence stays? What if, despite your grace, self-control, and inner work, he remains distant, unavailable, or emotionally closed off? This is where the deepest kind of power lives. Not in how you make him return, but in how you choose yourself even when he doesn't. The difference between hope and self-betrayal. When a man goes silent, many women cling to hope. Hope that he'll text. Hope that he'll change. Hope that he'll come to his senses. Hope isn't bad, but there's a fine line between hope and self-abandonment. If your hope keeps you stuck in anxiety, waiting by the phone, shrinking your needs just to keep him close, that's not love. That's fear of loss disguised as loyalty. Ask yourself, am I still honoring my needs? Am I still expressing my truth? Am I still showing up for my joy? Or am I staying quiet to avoid scaring him away? Am I walking on eggshells hoping he'll return? Am I making excuses for his emotional absence? Because if you're betraying your own heart in the name of love, it's not love anymore. It's dependency. And your feminine power cannot breathe inside that cage. Silence is communication. Here's the truth no one wants to hear. Silence is an answer. When a man doesn't text back, when he disappears for days or weeks without explanation, when he consistently avoids emotional depth, he is telling you everything you need to know. Even if he says nothing, even if he says I'm just busy, even if he says I care, I'm just not ready. At some point, you have to stop interpreting his silence through the lens of potential and start seeing it through the lens of reality. Because while it's true that men often pull away when feelings get strong, a man who is emotionally ready will always return with clarity. A man who respects you will not leave you guessing. A man who wants a future will communicate, even if it's messy. So if his silence persists, that silence is your closure. Choosing yourself is the ultimate reclamation. There is nothing more magnetic than a woman who doesn't beg for clarity. She becomes the clarity. She doesn't demand closure. She becomes the closure. She doesn't try to make someone stay. She embodies the energy that makes people want to stay. And the standards that let them go when they don't. This isn't about pretending you don't care. It's about learning that your peace is more important than a relationship that keeps you in confusion. And sometimes, choosing yourself means walking away without the apology you deserved, without the conversation you hoped for, without the I'm sorry that never came, because you realize that no explanation will ever be more valuable than the freedom of your own emotional clarity. There's no shame in wanting more. Let's be honest. You wanted it to work. You saw his potential. You felt the chemistry. You imagined a future. That's not weakness. That's human. But wanting something doesn't mean it's right for you. Wanting someone doesn't mean they're capable of giving you what you deserve. And staying attached to someone who repeatedly chooses confusion over clarity, silence over presence, and distance over depth, that's not romantic. That's a form of self-rejection. You're allowed to want more. You're allowed to say, this dynamic is no longer good for my nervous system. You're allowed to choose a love that doesn't leave you guessing. You're allowed to stop surviving in relationships and start thriving in them. Signs it's time to let go with grace. Here are a few signs that his silence is no longer about processing, but avoidance. He disappears for days or weeks and shows no remorse. You initiate every conversation or check-in. You feel more anxious than secure. He avoids accountability and blames your emotions. You feel like you're always too much. You've started shrinking yourself to keep him. If you recognize these signs, it's not time to try harder. It's time to let go harder. Not to punish him, but to protect you. What letting go with grace looks like. Letting go doesn't have to look like anger or drama. It doesn't have to be loud, messy, or vindictive. Sometimes the most powerful goodbye is the quietest one. It sounds like, I care about you, but I won't chase uncertainty. This dynamic no longer supports my peace. I wish you healing, but I'm choosing myself now. You don't have to beg. You don't have to explain. You don't have to get closure. You just have to choose peace over potential. And when you do, you reclaim every ounce of energy you were giving away. You bring that energy back into your own body, your own heart, your own future. And in doing so, you become the woman who doesn't wait to be chosen. You become the woman who chooses herself. Every time. What awaits on the other side? Here's what most women discover once they stop chasing emotionally unavailable men. Their anxiety melts away. Their confidence returns. Their creativity flows again. Their standards rise naturally. Their world expands beyond the narrow confines of waiting for a text. And eventually, they attract partners who match their new energy. Because love always meets you at the level of your self-respect. The more you honor yourself, the more you repel those who don't. And the more aligned partners show up. Not because you chased them, but because you became the kind of woman whose energy speaks for itself. This isn't just about one man. This is about a pattern. And your power to break it. This is about learning how to sit in the discomfort of not knowing, without making it mean you're unworthy. This is about becoming the kind of woman who loves deeply, but never at the cost of herself. So if he pulls away, let him. If he stays silent, let him. If he returns, you'll know how to meet him. With grace. not fear. And if he doesn't, let that silence be the sacred space where you finally hear yourself again. You are not here to convince someone to choose you. You are here to become so aligned, radiant, and whole that the right man will never have to be convinced. He will simply recognize you, and you'll recognize yourself as the woman who finally chose her own heart first. Ready to reclaim your power in love? If this message resonated with you, if you're done chasing, overthinking, and waiting for clarity that never comes, then this space is for you. Subscribe now to receive more insights on feminine energy, emotional mastery, and magnetic self-worth. Because the most attractive thing you can ever do is choose yourself first. Tap subscribe and step into the version of you that never begs to be loved, because she is the love.